Why was Biafra not supported by any major countries during the Nigerian Civil War? On May 30th, 1967, Biafra declared independence from Nigeria, sparking a brutal civil war. But despite its struggle, no major world power officially backed Biafra. Why? First, Britain supported Nigeria. As Nigeria's former colonial ruler, Britain had economic and strategic interests, especially in oil-rich regions controlled by the Nigerian government. They supplied weapons, intelligence, and diplomatic backing to Lagos. Next, the Soviet Union and the United States both favored Nigeria. The Cold War was raging, but neither superpower wanted to risk their global influence over Biafra. The Soviets sent arms to Nigeria, while the U.S. maintained neutrality but refused to recognize Biafra. Even African nations turned their backs. The Organization of African Unity, OAU, saw Biafra's secession as a threat to African unity, fearing it could inspire other separatist movements. Only a few, like Tanzania, Gabon, and Ivory Coast, recognized Biafra. Biafra's only real support came through humanitarian aid and secret arms deals. France, Portugal, and Israel quietly sent weapons, but it wasn't enough to turn the tide. Meanwhile, Biafrans relied on foreign charities like the Red Cross for food and medicine. By January 1970, after years of starvation and war, Biafra was forced to surrender. Without strong international backing, its dream of independence was crushed.
The South African government has said it will not participate in President Trump's counterproductive megaphone diplomacy. South Africa made a statement in reaction to a social media post by Donald Trump in which he repeated his claim that Pretoria was confiscating land. Trump also extended his invitation to white South Africans to relocate to the US, offering them citizenship. South Africa had previously said that Trump misunderstood the country's new Land Expropriation Act. The US government has frozen financial aid to South Africa because of the land policy. The government of the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, has offered a reward of $5 million for help arresting 3 M23 rebel group leaders. The group has seized much of the east of the country this year. The DRC government tried the 3 men in absentia last year and sentenced them to death for treason. It is 5:30 p.m. in Accra, Ghana, 6:30 p.m. in Lagos, Nigeria, and 1:30 p.m. in New York City. Wherever in the world you are joining us, welcome to another episode of 90 Minutes Africa. My name is Rudolf Okonkwo. My co-host, Chido Onoma, is on assignment. Our guest today is Professor Philip Effiong Jr. He's the son of General Philip Effiong, the deputy to General Chukwuemeka Ojukwu, the leader of Biafra during the Nigerian-Biafra Civil War. Effiong Jr. is a distinguished scholar and educator, currently teaching drama at Michigan State University, with a PhD in drama from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His academic journey spans teaching positions in Nigeria, Ghana, and the United States, where he has made significant contributions in areas such as drama, fiction, nonfiction, oral tradition, and writing. In his critically acclaimed memoir, Nigeria's Uncivil War, Memories of a Biafran Child, Professor Effiong Jr. reflects on the enduring scars of the war, offering a deeply personal perspective on its trauma and complex narratives that continue to shape post-war identities. His upcoming book, My Biafran Scar, A War and Post-War Narrative, set for release later this year, delves further into the lasting impact of the war and its multifaceted stories. Please join me in welcoming to the show Professor Philip Effiong. Welcome to the show, Prof.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you very well. Thank you so much. It's an honor to have you today on the show.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here as well. There's so many people you could invite, but you've invited me, so I don't take this for granted. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much. Let's begin with the stories in the news. We talked about leading in the stories in Africa is the ongoing issue with South Africa and the Trump administration. I wanted to know if you can weigh in on that. What do you think is going on? Why is Trump picking on South Africa?
Well, Elon Musk is from South Africa, that technically is his deputy president. South Africa has a long-standing history of being one of the most brutal and vicious racist countries, for many, many years. It victimized and devastated the lives of people, mostly Black people. But if you were not white, and that's its history. And I doubt that Mr. Trump knows the history or cares about the history of South Africa. All he's speaking, his pronouncements are the pronouncements of a man who believes in the racial superiority of European white people. And that's all he cares about. He's a product of that history. If you look at his family, if you look at his activities from when he didn't rent out property to people of color, you look at his pronouncements, and I mean, just look at his criminal record. All he's interested in is advancing this notion that Europeans, white people, Caucasians are superior and they have the right to own whatever they want, to dominate, to control power. And where they're losing that in South Africa, it becomes his problem. And to start inviting white people to America as victims is ridiculous. The people who are really being victimized around the world and who need safety in places like America, he's denying them entry to America. So I don't think this needs to be overflogged. We know what he's all about. He's a racist and supporting a racist enterprise, which is South Africa, even though changes have taken place over the years.
The other story is out of Congo. Congo is another country in Africa that has seen crisis from the very beginning. I know that your father fought in Congo. I have a distant cousin who died in Congo in the 60s. So when you look at the story of Congo, what is your take on why it continues to be the way it is?
Well, like you've rightly pointed out, my father and a number of other African and Nigerian officers served as part of the peacekeeping force in the Congo in the 60s. The Congo is one of the richest resource countries in the world. And if we don't get to the root of the problem, we'll never resolve the problem. The problem, we focus on the rebel groups, militants, and stuff like that. But there's a greater history that has not been addressed, and one that is rooted in not just the colonial history, but the neo-colonial history of the Congo. As long as it has the resources that it has, efforts will be made to get those resources by multinational corporations, and they'll do whatever they want to do, including instigate and support some of the conflicts. Companies like Nokia and other phone companies, they have no problem with the conflict, because as long as the conflict takes place, then they're able to get coltan at cheap prices, and other minerals that they need for their industries. And except we get to the root of the problem, we'll just be, the problem will be ongoing. It's not going to be resolved by arresting or killing or fighting or whatever. We need to get to the root cause of the problem, which I said has colonial and neo-colonial history.
So what should be done? AU had a meeting last month, I believe, and they agreed to send Nigeria's Olusegun Obasanjo and President Kenyatta to go and find peace in Congo. This has been going on since the 60s. Why is it that Africa cannot deal with that, especially when they know the history behind the crisis?
Well, unfortunately, if you look at the AU and you look at a lot of Africa's leadership, you speak to the people of Africa, they don't have confidence in the leadership or even in the AU. I believe the resources are there. If the continent can come together, we have the resources, the human resources, we have the means, we have the intelligence, even the military resources, I believe, as well, to address these problems. But I don't know that we have the unity that we need. Unfortunately, we've become increasingly territorial. The trappings of power continues to be the main concern of a lot of our leaders. Otherwise, this single country, it is our problem. It is not the problem of the United Nations. It's not the problem of Europe. It is an African problem. And if we want to pay attention using the resources that we have, everything from intellectual resources to other professional resources, I even mentioned military resources, we can bring about change, but we're divided, and unfortunately, a lot of us are selfishly more concerned with the trappings of power. But the solution is definitely not going to come from the West. The West has never solved any of our problems on the African continent. We have the intelligence, we have the people, and we can't continue to do things the same way and expect a different result. It's time to now operate differently with a stronger sense of unity that we've exhibited over the years, and really do something about the Congo, and not just about the Congo. There are other parts of the continent where we have a crisis. They may not be as deep-seated, but they're there as well.
Is there any model that you can see that could be a way out? We see the French-speaking countries in Africa, like Burkina Faso, Niger, revolting against the French. A place like Congo, where it's Belgium that ruled, or the king that was there. How are they going to be able to remove themselves from these external forces that are trying to exploit them?
Well, it's been done. It's just that the West is not going to give up. When Thomas Sankara, when he was in power, one of the things he refused to do is accept aid from the French. He said, if you accept aid from people, that they're going to, one way or the other, they're going to control you. And we have to find a way to fund ourselves, to provide the aid we need for ourselves, because we have it, but we've got to believe it. Mentally, I think something is happening here that continues to convince us that we need external help. I don't believe we do. I think we have all we need on the continent. The one thing I would say, though, is let's prepare for some kind of retaliation. The West is not going to fold their arms because they want to constantly control us and control our resources. But let's take example from our cousins, our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. The only time African Americans have made tremendous progress is when they have come together independently to do things for themselves. But look at what happened in Oklahoma. The attacks are going to be there. Look at our relatives in the Caribbean. The only time they've made tremendous progress is when they've looked inward and believed in themselves. Or look at our war. Think about the survival during that war. With virtually nothing, people were able to still find a way to create weapons, to create fabrics, to go back to traditional methods of healing. I was healed. I had measles. I was cured with palm wine. So we have all these things. It's just that we've got to get to a point where we believe in ourselves. Unfortunately, our colonial and enslaved history has taught us not to believe in ourselves, but I think we can regain belief in ourselves.
All right, we are going to get to the war and the story of Nigeria, but let's move away from Congo a little bit, and knowing that Nigerian soldiers participated in the first attempt to bring peace to that country. Now, looking at the situation in Congo, where and I want you to tell me if this is wrong, the rebels, the Tutsis, who are minority in Congo, are saying that they are not being treated well in Congo, and that's why they are fighting to get that be accepted and treated well within the country. And some people in Congo are saying they are not part of this country. They are part of Uganda. They are part of Rwanda. You know. So do you think that we have to go back to the conference, the Berlin Conference of 1880, 84, 85, to begin to resolve the African problem?
Yeah, I don't think we need to go back to that conference. That conference was definitely a major part of our problem. But when you see what the Tutsis, the Hutus are saying, you know, is it too different from what the Yoruba, what the Igbo are saying in Nigeria? You know, there is a massive problem across the continent where nations were created in very artificial ways, and artificial boundaries were created, and people who never lived together, we traded together, we worked together, but we didn't live under a single government. You now bring people together to live under a single government. The more powerful are likely to dominate, and that's what's happening. So we should definitely consider the harm caused by the Berlin Conference, but that is not our solution. We need to come to a point where we redefine for ourselves the administrative systems that work for us, that are different from what the Europeans brought. It doesn't mean that everything the Europeans brought was horrible. After all, there are a lot of things they've gotten from us. But we ultimately need to rely on our own values, rely on our own belief systems, rely on our own traditional systems to define what works for us. The issue of breaking away and having separate countries is not really a new thing. You know, it's happened. If you look across the Soviet Union, it happened. You look at places like you look at places like the Sudan, Eritrea. You look at a lot of countries across the world, they've come to that point where people have decided this geographical space is not good for me. I need to step out and redefine myself and achieve self-determination in a new space. So I'm not discarding that option. That option needs to be also negotiated, and where people are making those demands, they need to be respected, and we need to listen to them.
Will you say that people from Katanga in the region in Congo would have been better off if they had broken out of the country at the beginning than they are? If after 50 years they're still fighting over there, there's no peace in Congo?
You know, it's hard for me to say if that's what the people are requesting. Perhaps it would have been, but there's always going to be the problem of resources. I'm not sure. I'll be honest with you, when we talk about resources in the Congo, I'm not sure what Katanga has. But if that's a place like Port Harcourt, for instance, if that's a place like Rio that has resources, then efforts are going to be made to prevent them from moving away. But they might be better off. I believe there are many of us that would be better off if we had more autonomy over our lives. That's what people are asking for. And those examples, you have many examples from history. Like I said, you look at the former Soviet Union, you look even countries like Ecuador, Eritrea. I have some notes here that I'm looking at. They were all part of a larger Grand Colombia. There are many examples in history. You can look at Slovakia, Armenia, Lithuania. It's not a new thing. So yeah, I believe better autonomy, if I separate, is something that's good for me, and it might be good for Katanga as well.
All right, let's come back to Nigeria. The problem in Nigeria started with the coup in, some people said with the coup in 1966, January 15th. Some people go back to 1953, the riot in Kano. Some go as far back as 40-something. You have written books and you have studied that, and your family were at the center of some of the issues that happened in Nigeria. Where would you point at and say this is where the problem started?
It's really hard, but I would go further back. The moment you have foreigners who don't respect you and who are racists coming to take charge of your affairs, that is going to create turbulence. And that, for me, is where it starts. Let's go back to when the British made Nigeria their colony, whatever we want to call it. Let's remember, however, that Nigeria, and in fact, most of Africa, had a long-standing tradition of receiving visitors to their communities. As long as those visitors came from outside, the visitors could come with their own leaders, but you had to respect the land and you had to pay tribute to the land. You can call it taxation like we call it today. And you had such settlements. The settlement of you have a large population of Igbos in the north, and Easterners. It didn't start with the colonizers. It didn't start when Nigeria became Nigeria. Those communities have always been there. But the moment you create a situation where ethnic groups feel like they're struggling for resources, then that becomes a problem. And that became a major problem in Nigeria. It's not the only problem, but I would say it goes well back before the coup. The coup, what happened in 1953, those are just symptoms of a larger problem, the consequences of a problem. They weren't the problems. Those were just things that were triggered by a number of ethnic and social issues that were happening, and the conflicts that were developing. And they mightn't have happened if we didn't have the kind of colonial history that we had.
So when you look at Nigeria today, you have democracy. We've been practicing the third wave, I believe, since 1999. And it's not getting better by any standard. If you look at today's Nigeria, you have Rivers State in crisis, Osun State almost in crisis. There are problems, insecurity everywhere in the north, east, northwest, southeast. So is Nigeria safer today? Is there more hope in Nigeria today than in January or March? January, let's say go back to January of 1966.
No, Nigeria is not safer today. Even after the war, a couple of months after the war, there was relative calm and safety across Nigeria. What we have today is frustration that has been developing over the years because people feel marginalized, and there is a limit to which people can be deprived the opportunity to live fulfilling lives, which is what has happened. And so people are responding in different ways, including violent ways as well, unfortunately. And you mentioned democracy. Part of the problem is we're not really practicing democracy. And maybe you shouldn't ask people as old as myself, ask younger people. They'll more courageously tell you that we don't have a democracy. Whether you look at our recent elections or look at the way, our systems of governance, they'll say, no, there's no democracy. There is power abuse and dominance. So no, we're not safer. And what you see is the expression of frustration, and it manifests in different ways. Unfortunately, one of those ways is through violence, and unfortunately, innocent people are going to be victims. We're not safer. I lived in Nigeria all through the 60s. When I was going to secondary school, I'd get into a taxi cab, sometimes arrive late at night. It was never an issue. We moved around freely. There were hardly fences between our homes. What separated our homes were maybe flowers or low fences, So we felt safe. We felt secure. It doesn't mean there wasn't crime, but it wasn't anything compared to what you have today.
So on the eve of January 1966, where were you?
January 1966, I was in Lagos. I was a little boy, and we lived in a place called Ann Barracks, AN. That's where I was, in answer to your question.
What was that? I wanted some more than that, but I know you get it. You got the answer. What was the environment like? I mean, what I mean by that is, what was the mood like? Did you have any sense as a little boy that something was about to happen?
Yes, and it's actually there in my book. I was a little boy, but I also, before 1966, I also remember the sense of camaraderie in our barracks, in the military generally. You know, there was a strong sense of camaraderie, and honestly, ethnicity was hardly a part of our discussion. But 1966, I knew something was wrong. I felt it because human beings have intuition. We're spiritual beings, and even babies, recognize things. So I knew something was wrong because generally there was just this atmosphere of gloom, and my father was out of the house more than he usually was, and people seemed to be whispering a little bit more. I knew that something was wrong, and every once in a while we had military officers visit our home, but for the first time they would come with rifles. And even though this was really long ago, these images have stayed with me. So yeah, I knew something was wrong. I felt it, and I think a lot of people felt it, regardless of age.
Now, what about your father and the role he played during that period, especially that coup period?
Yeah, my father was the director of ordnance in the Nigerian army before the coup. He was actually the first indigenous director of ordnance, and his story is that at some point, the second coup, not the first coup was really a disappointment to professional soldiers like him, who were more interested in securing the safety of our people and protecting the land. But when the second coup was being planned, it became an open secret. And at that point, he had been posted to the State House and was the principal staff officer under Ironsi. So he let Ironsi know. Unfortunately, Ironsi now informed people who turned out to be the coup plotters that this is what Effiong had told him. And so my father became a marked man. Unfortunately, he was in Kaduna. He had just been posted to Kaduna before that coup took place. And thanks to friends, the Catholic Church, I think the American consulate, he managed to escape in disguise out of Kaduna and return to Lagos, where he remained in hiding because the coup plotters who knew that he had informed Ironsi about their plot were after him. Yeah.
Mm. And what about you? How did you move around during that period?
Well,
did you move your dad to Kaduna? How was the movement that period?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you when you were asking your question. We hadn't yet relocated to Kaduna. Okay. My father was only there for about a month. So we were still in Ann Barracks, but we had to evacuate Ann Barracks. So it was my mother and some friends who took us out, and we stayed with with the family of another military officer. This man, Colonel Trimnell, from Ishaka, from areas around where my mother is from. His wife was a Yoruba woman, so they had a family home there in Lagos, and they took us in along with their children. They had about 7 children, so we were like 15 children, not counting house helps, other relatives, and the life just changed overnight. But we were grateful to the Trimnells, because if they hadn't taken us in, who knows what would have happened. But all the time we were there, we couldn't see my father. He was still in Lagos, but he was in hiding, and he managed to eventually escape Lagos to the east. And the Colonel Trimnell himself, everybody from around Ukwani, Ishaka, Ibuza, they were all described as Igbo people. So his life was also in danger. So he was also in hiding as well. But eventually I don't know how my father did it, but with the help of friends, we were then removed from Lagos to return to the east, to Enugu specifically.
Mm. So the crisis, the second coup happened, and the country went down the drain from that point. So your father, what was he, when he went back to the east, did he become an associate of Ojukwu? How did he now become close to Ojukwu? What was he?
Well, remember that there was an official announcement by Gowan that officers should return to their regions of origin. So what my father did, even though he had to do it in hiding, in disguise, he was actually obeying the directives of Gowan. But when he went to the east, he of course he had served in the military with General Ojukwu, who was the governor then. So he knew him. So naturally, he would connect with the governor and find out what was happening. And there were still disagreements and negotiations and discussions between the eastern region and the rest of Nigeria. And you know about the Aburi and all of that. You know, all of that was ongoing. So for the most part, you know, as a senior officer, my father was a part of a lot of the conversations, a lot of the meetings. The issue of secession had not come up. It came up later. It came up precisely after, not just after the agreements in Abuja were reneged, but after the creation of states. And that is when officially Biafra was created. And my father was not initially the second in command. For instance, he had been the head of the militia. He had served in other positions before he became the second in command.
Okay. So I'm thinking, I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes, a small kid, young person watching the country and knowing, probably, I don't know if you met Aguiyi-Ironsi before he died, knowing that he was killed. What were you thinking about that time, you know, knowing that your father was in the same profession as the head of state who was killed? What was it? Can you please share with us anything?
It's a good question, because many times people seem to think that young people, children, are disconnected from these things. But no. First of all, let me say I had met Ironsi once. There was when his daughter Angela had a birthday party. I remember attending it, and I remember seeing him, you know, walk in and hug his daughter, and you know, he left us, the children, to just enjoy the birthday party. But in Enugu, when eventually all those things happened and we returned to Enugu and we heard about his murder, it hurt me, because this was Uncle. This was Uncle Ironsi. These people were intimate part of our lives, even though they were grown-ups, they were adults, because they were my parents' friends. They were also like family to us. So we heard about it and it was sad. And I knew as a child that there was danger. I just felt this aura of danger everywhere. And then at the time, a lot of people were returning from the north, those who had escaped, and some of them would stop by at my parents' home and tell them stories of the program, of the killings. And those were very, 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 very disturbing stories, because the stories were consistent about people being beheaded, people's eyes being gouged out, people being cut in two, people having their ears slashed, and all women having their wombs ripped open, and their children ripped out of those out of their wombs. So a lot of this was just accumulating in my psyche as a child, and the result was just a feeling of absolute fear and a feeling of insecurity, of nervousness, of anxiety, and that aura, just stayed with us throughout the war and even after. Yeah.
Now, what you are describing is for those of us who didn't see the war, thinking that, oh, is that different from what we're seeing now with headsmen cutting people, killing people? Is that different? That's what most people might be thinking. It's when you see this, what do you think going on at the present day Nigeria?
You know, it's not the same situation, but it boils down to the same thing. You know, the meaningless destruction of lives for very selfish reasons or for ethnic reasons, for prejudicial reasons. You know, the people in the East, and most of them were Igbos who were killed, had not had a history of committing crime in the North. They lived in relative peace. They weren't, there's no history of them committing armed robbery or raping women or burning down the mosques or anything like that. And so what you see happening today, it may not be exactly the same situation, but it boils down to the meaningless destruction of lives for reasons that don't make sense. And these reasons may be ethnically based, or they may be based on religion, whatever they are based on. The fact that they're still happening and happening without any measures in place to stop them from happening is disturbing. For me, it's like a continuation of what happened in the past. It's just that it's taken on a new form, a new shape, a new face, whatever you want to call it. But, you know, it's part of this history of insecurity, of ethnic bigotry, of hatred, and this history of wanting to get power through any means, especially through aggressive means. I just see that continuing today, even though it may be a different situation.
So let's keep going down. So there were crises, and then your father left Lagos for the east, and they went to Aburi hoping to find peace.
Mm-hmm.
When that failed, what did you remember?
Well, the Aburi meeting, I didn't know much about it then. I knew about it more later on. The only thing I knew was that a new nation had been created. I was a part of that nation. I was now the citizen no longer of Nigeria, but of Biafra, and that Nigeria was the enemy, and Nigeria was evil, and Nigeria wanted to destroy us, and we had to be prepared to defend ourselves. That was the overriding message. Aburi, I would learn more and read more and study more about Aburi later on. I know that Aburi had something to do with that, but the creation of states as well was a major part of the reason for secession. Secession was never the priority of the Eastern region, contrary to what people may think. I think it was just due to circumstances, and it became what it became, and unfortunately led to the more genocidal attacks rather than reducing the genocidal attacks. Rather than making us more secure, it actually endangered our lives more.
So interesting. Looking at the sequence of things. So at the point when Ojukwu now decided to declare, let me go back to the coup, the first coup. This book published by Ibrahim Babangida, a lot of people have talked about it. One of the things that came out of it was this idea he presented in the book that the Igbo coup concept is not what it is, something like that, that it wasn't an Igbo coup. At that point, when that happened, what was the feeling? What did you understand about the coup plotters and who they were, and what was the general feeling of people who were there at that time?
You know, what Babangida is saying now, did he not know this before? Other leaders on the Nigerian side who called it an Igbo coup and who justified the massacre of Igbos in the north, didn't they know? Are they just knowing? What's the point mentioning this now when you knew it all along, and when people like you could have taken a stand so that Igbos wouldn't have been victimized the way they were victimized? You know, of course it was not an Igbo coup. If you look at that coup, the major participants, the person whose idea it was Ifa Juna, Then he brought in Nzogo and then Ademoyega, a Yoruba man. Those were the principal leaders of that coup. Nzogo has been, if you don't mind my using, Igborized more than he needs to be Igborized. The man was from Asaba, but was more of a northerner than anything else. In fact, he was such a northerner that people attributed to him a tradition that's common in the north, which is to give you the name of your place of birth. And so he was called Kaduna. And Chinua Achebe mentions him in his book, There Was a Country. Chinua Achebe says that the man could hardly make a sentence in his Saba language, which is very much like Igbo. But he could speak Hausa like a native, you know. So if you look at these three people, the only real Igbo person there was Ifajuna. And then nobody's talking about the non-commissioned officers, the sergeants, the staff sergeants, many of whom were not Igbos. Many are not talking about young officers like Atonkbera, who later became the governor of the Benue Plateau. So Babangida has said that that's good, that's wonderful, except that it is too late, if you don't mind my saying it. I guess it's not too late to correct history, but if people like him and people who, he was a relatively junior officer, but there were top officers who knew that that was not the truth. They could have taken a stand, and it might have gone a long way in preventing a lot of those unnecessary killings. But I assure you that even though Babangida has said this, there's still many people that are still going to tout that coup as an Igbo coup, which is absolute nonsense. Excuse my English or French.
Yeah. So let me go back to killing of Aguiyi-Ironsi. Did you, at that point, I know that the time had passed, know any details about things like people that killed him and why they killed him? Was it known to people who were around at that time?
Major, what is his name? I'm trying to remember this man. I think it's a common name that's affiliated with his killing. Danjuma.
Yeah.
Danjuma has never denied it. Nobody has denied it. He was a major, he wasn't the only one who led that coup. Someone like Murtala Mohammed was a key participant in that coup. I don't know what General Gowon's role was, but for General Gowon to be accepted by the coup plotters and eventually made head of state, he must have at least given them his loyalty. Coup plotters are not going to put people who they don't trust into power after they succeed in their coups. But I would say Danjuma was, as far as going to State House and taking him out of State House, it was Danjuma. And the night that he was taken away, a few hours before, he had actually spoken to my father in Kaduna. Because at this point, there was chaos, turbulence. He had lost his command. My father was trying to escape from Kaduna, but they had one more phone call. And in the phone call, it didn't achieve anything. Ironsi just called to tell him, hey, there are problems. And my father felt like telling him, I told you so. But of course, my father wouldn't do that. So Danjuma has not denied it. Nobody has denied it. So when it comes to the direct killing of Ironsi, he was among the group that went to State House. He was probably the highest ranking officer. So he needs to be held responsible for that. But of course, he wasn't the only one who took part in that coup. In the end, it was just a waste of life. Ironsi had about 7 children. Can you imagine what it meant to those children? And Ironsi had not done anything wrong. He had actually played a key role in ensuring that the first coup was not a success. He played a key role, and all the people who were involved in that coup were in detention at the time, waiting trial. And some would argue that one of his mistakes was to put Northerners in key positions of power. I don't know whether that is true or not, but he wasn't a politician. He was a soldier, and for the most part, he was a gentleman as well. And he just did what he thought he needed to do. But unfortunately, it all worked against him and he lost his life.
Most people who were not there, when they look at it, the history, they say that Ojukwu led the Igbo people to a war that they were sure they would not win. What is your understanding of the sequence of events after the failure of the Aburi Accord and the decision to go to war?
Well, where people want to fault General Ojukwu, they can do that. Where they need to give him credit, they also need to do that. He was in a situation where thousands of his people were being slaughtered and were returning to the region where he was governor. I mean, what was he expected to do? Let's make him an EFIC officer, and he was right there in the capital of of whatever the state is, Calabar, and EFIC people are being killed in the thousands and returned to Calabar. What do you expect him to do? To just embrace the new government that has, in one way or the other, been given the audacity to massacre people in the north? The audacity came from that government because that government didn't do anything about it. They didn't step in. So how could you trust this government that had demonstrated that it doesn't value the sacredness of your people's lives? Having said that, he did go on into negotiations and at Aburi accepted Gowan as the new head of state. So you can't just, we shouldn't ignore the damage done when the parts of the agreement, the federal side reneged on parts of the agreement. Of course, that's going to only cause more concern, more suspicion. And then you go ahead and create new states and basically render Ojukwu as a non-entity at that point. So there's a lot of bitterness, a lot of distrust, and they create this new nation because they don't feel secure in the other nation. But remember that the creation of Biafra was not a declaration of war. Biafra didn't as much as throw a stone at the Nigerian side. So to say that he led people into war when he didn't declare war is really, it sounds really ridiculous to me. War was declared on the Nigerian side. They called it police action, but it was a full-scale war. And I know because I was there and I witnessed it. So no, he didn't lead the people. The people had a right to defend themselves. And for the most part, that's what happened in Biafra, even if we may have made some mistakes in the process.
Now, in your book, you talked about life in Biafra as a kid. Can you, for those who are yet to read the book, and I'm hoping that they will all go and get the book and read after this, can you give us a little idea of how life was in Biafra for you?
Yeah, I was the son of a general who became second in command. So obviously I had access to certain things that many people didn't have access to. Let me just make that very clear. I didn't starve. However, we were all victims. People like to use the word privilege, but I don't use the word privilege. From when we left Lagos, each time we ran away from one community, one town, one city, we lost property. I didn't go to school throughout the war. Occasionally I had some homeschooling. I lost relatives, I lost my grandfather, I lost one of my aunties, I lost my younger cousin. Our entire family compound, what we call compound in Nigeria, it's not just one house. It was completely razed, completely destroyed. And then after the war, of course, we were practically destitute, virtually homeless, and my parents just had to find a way to survive and raise their 7, then 8 children. So life in Biafra, yes, I compared to a lot of people, I was more secure, but I was equally vulnerable in many instances. For instance, when the planes came and bombed, the planes didn't just bomb on certain homes or certain communities. You know, a plane wouldn't come in and say, well, that's General Effiong's house, let's not bomb it. You know, so, you know, I think all of us to various degrees were victims and our lives were devastated. And the psychological mental effects continue to be felt to this day. I don't wish it on anybody. I don't wish the war experience on anybody.
When your father became Ojukwu's deputy, how did you receive the news? What changed?
It really didn't come as a surprise. I don't know if I remember an instance where my father was declared second in command. I always knew my father was a senior officer because he was among the first generation of military officers in Nigeria. So I'd always seen him as someone who held a key position in the army. So when I eventually knew, maybe it wasn't on the day, but when I eventually knew that it was General Ojukwu's deputy, it really, I don't think I was extra excited or anything like that. I just saw him as still holding a key position in the military. Yeah. Of course, I was happy about his success generally in his career, which of course started before the war. But his being second in command, I think, was purely based on experience and nothing else. He was probably, in Biafra, he was probably the first officer to be commissioned. I'm talking of pre-Biafra, among the officers in Biafra. So it didn't excite me extra, but it did come with some benefits. I have to admit that.
So your family were you guys moving as the war progressed, and where were you towards the end of it?
Yeah. We, first of all, from Lagos, we went to Ikorekpene, then Ikorekpene, Enugu back to Ikorekpene to Umuahia, and then Umuahia, we moved to Ifakala. This was the one time when we were homeless during the war, and it may come as a surprise to people, but I like to tell people that, tell this story, because if the second in command, if his family could be homeless, then imagine what's happening to other people. But my father's aide-de-camp, which is like your special assistant if you're a top military officer, his father had a home in Ifakala. They're from a place called Ifakala. It's near Owerri. And they took us in. They took my mother and my brothers and sisters, as well as my mother's sister and her children. They gave us accommodation there. And I think my father, he settled somewhere else, you know, but he didn't stay there with us because he had his military responsibilities and duties to take care of. So yeah, we moved to Ifakala, and we were still in Ifakala, and that's where I saw firsthand the sad refugee and starvation problems, which I'm not going to go into here because I don't think we have time. But those images of starving and dying children, we saw a lot of death in Ifakala too. Those images are still with me. But we were still in Ifakala when Biafra, you know, regained control of Owerri. It was one of the greatest victories in Biafra, because looking back at what I know about Biafra, it's nothing short of a miracle that they were able to eventually recapture Owerri. And so we moved to Owerri. But, you know, Biafra at this point had shrunk in size. Most of Biafra had been overtaken, had been overrun. Most of Biafra was starving. There was little or no infrastructure. The morale of the soldiers was very low. Biafra was in its worst state, so to speak. So eventually, Owerri was to be recaptured. And just before it was recaptured, I'm not going into details. We escaped again from Owerri, but this time there was no place to go to. So we actually ended up in Nnewi. Later on, I would learn about arrangements between my father and Ojukwu. Ojukwu had told my father he was leaving in search of peace. And my father said, well, I'm going to stay, but can you take my wife and my children? She's pregnant. So eventually we left about 3 days before the war ended. We left on a cargo plane. It didn't have seats. You know, when I fly today and they say fasten your seatbelts, I just shake my head. I say, you guys don't understand. But we left on that plane, and it took me, my mother, my cousin, my older and younger brother. We left. Our first destination was Sao Tome, and then we went to other places. I'm not going to go into those details. I don't think there's time, but all of that is in my book.
We have time, but you can't say all the stories. There are so many ways you can go with this conversation. And for those who want to know more, of course, the book is available on Amazon and anywhere else you buy books. So, so your family left 3 days before the end of the war, and who also left. Was there any agreement with Ojukwu and your father that he should hand over should surrender?
No, there was no agreement, but I think we understand, looking back, what was going on. I think at this point there was this agreement, unofficial agreement, that Biafra couldn't continue to defend itself. So there was no agreement, but my father, after Ojukwu left, my father now consulted with the few Biafran leaders that were still there, including people like Justice Mbanefo. And they decided that it would be the best thing to negotiate some kind of peace and an end to the war. The one thing my father did, the one decision he made, I think he knew he was going to go that route. So at first, General Madiebo, the head of the Biafran army, was not supposed to leave with Ojukwu, but my father told Ojukwu he would prefer if he left. And I didn't understand why my father made that request until later on. My father anticipated that there might be a clash, a power clash. He might decide we need to go this route. And if Madiebo made a different decision, there might have been a problem, because Madiebo was the head of the army. So who would the people obey? So that is the one conscious request I know my father made. And I know that it was based on his decision that he would find a way to end this sad, tragic situation, which fortunately he was able to do, but not by himself. I think it is important to recognize those others who participated in bringing an end to the situation. But there was no agreement that he would go to Lagos and do what he did. That was not part of his agreement with General Ojukwu, no.
All right. We have a lot of people who are interested in joining us in this conversation. We will talk more about your experience and then bring them in a few minutes. But at this point, I think let's take a break, 3 minutes or 4. When we come back, we will continue our conversation with Professor Philip Effiong. Thank you so much. All right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much. We've been having an interesting conversation with Professor Philip Effiong, the son of General Effiong, who was Ojukwu's deputy during the Nigerian Civil War. He's been talking about his recollections in the book, Nigeria's on Civil War. He has another book coming up about identity and the narratives of that war. So let me ask you, why did you choose on Civil War?
You know, there are many. There's a lot of things that are thrown out there, you know, phrases and words, and many times we adopt them without thinking about them. There's nothing civil about a war. Civility involves harmony and friendship and kindness. That war was not civil, not just because of what have read about it, but because of what I experienced. I call it uncivil. You know, the civil is deceptive. It was horrible. It wasn't civil.
So at the end of the war, your father went to Lagos and with the Chief Justice of Biafra to surrender. We have a video of that ceremony. Let me play it for you, and for the audience to also watch and see what happened there. Just a minute. All right, so let's see. General, go on. All right, so let's see.
And we have with us today Colonel Obasanjo, and unfortunately the other field commanders are not able to be with us at this moment. But we have Colonel Obasanjo, who is the commander of 3 Marine Commando, who have been able to capture a number of senior secessionist officers, and he had brought them to Lagos to see us in order to let us have their acceptance of the spirit of one Nigeria.
Formally give up secession and report for reappointment and redeployment. Philip Effiong.
Your Excellency. Glad to see you again.
My pleasure.
How are you?
Very well, indeed.
Glad to see you again. Thank you.
Patrick Amadi.
How are you?
Excellency.
Glad to see you again.
Thank you very much.
Glad to see you again.
It's an experience.
Honestly, glad to see you again.
And I would like, therefore, to take this opportunity to say that I, Major General Philip Effiong, officer administering the government of the Republic of Biafra, now wish to make the following declaration. That we affirm we are loyal Nigerian citizens and accept the authority of the Federal Military Government of Nigeria. That we accept the existing administrative and political structure of the Federation of Nigeria. That any future constitutional arrangement will be worked out by representatives of the people of Nigeria. That the Republic of Biafra hereby ceases to exist.
Why is Amazon paying me $63,000?
Okay, Amazon. Okay.
All right. So that was sorry about. Let me.
I'm sorry. Say that again. I didn't hear you well.
Yeah, sorry. When you play this from YouTube, sometimes this happens. So that was the handover events that happened in Lagos. there was first time they met, and the one said, "I'm happy that we're able to do this on our own." That he was speaking to your dad, and your dad said, "I'm glad to be back, Jack." Now tell me, that process when he came back home, what was the feeling? What did he say to the family? How did you guys take that period, that move to surrender?
You know, it's not an easy thing to talk about. I don't know if we really went into any in-depth conversation. I knew he had done it, and as I grew older, I talked to him about aspects of the conflict. But it was very traumatic, regardless of what you see on that screen. I'm my father's son. I know what that situation, what emotionally and psychologically, what it was like. It wasn't as easy as it might look on screen, and so I can talk about my feelings more now than back then. To be honest with you, it was over, and I think there was just everybody was just relieved that it was over. But the war had only just started for many of us. He talks about go and says, and when you win, you can say whatever you like. He says Obasanjo, for instance, captured them. Did you hear those words? Never happened. In some other reports, people say that he went and stood at attention and saluted Gowan and said, reporting for duty, which never happened. So you have all these stories, like they say, the hunter, when, as long as they control the hunt, they'll try to control the narrative. So later years, even looking at it now, was very emotional for me. I almost turned off my camera. Because I knew that my father was having to submit to someone who was his junior in the army. Obasanjo wasn't even a part of the army. He hadn't even joined the army. He was probably closer to a teenager when my father joined the army. And here's my father having to submit to them. But one thing he always let me know is that what matters is the lives that were saved. I shouldn't think much about the process. Shouldn't think much about the consequences, because there were consequences. My parents remained jobless from that day until when they passed on, and they had children to raise. My father never received any benefits for his role in the army, not a penny. And my father was not an accountant in the army or a lawyer in the army or a teacher. He was a professional soldier. When you took that from him, he was dismissed without any benefits. You can imagine what that means. It's like taking away my PhD, taking away my home, my means of livelihood, and I have 7 children, then 8 to take care of. So what I see when I see that is not what a lot of people see. The one Nigeria thing he's talking about there just makes me laugh. Look at what has happened to his people in recent years. By the same people who fought on the same side with you for one Nigeria, look at what they're doing to your people. What kind of one Nigeria did you fight for? So, I'm sorry if I'm getting emotional.
Yeah, it's understandable.
My father, who was much younger than I am right now, it's not easy. Yeah.
To his credit, he stood there and called himself a general, General Philip Effiong.
Yes.
Even though he wasn't in the Nigerian army when he left the Nigerian army. So he stood his ground. He had his pride. I could see that.
Absolutely. And he said, I, Major General Philip Effiong, you accepted the document, which means you accepted to recognize him as a major general. But you see, in a lot of conversations later on, they use lieutenant colonel, So, these are some of the things that catch my attention. But, the Nigerian army has no right to give my father a rank. That army tried to murder my father in July of 1966. You don't have the right to give my father a rank, imagine if Michigan State University tried to kill me, and then Pennsylvania gave me a job and made me the president of the university, and Michigan said no, he's still an associate professor. You don't have that right. So yeah, my father stood his ground, and throughout the post-war situation, he never apologized. He always said he did what he knew to be right, and there were repercussions, but he never wavered on his vision and role in Biafra.
Didn't at one point former Biafran soldiers were brought back into the military? Was their father excluded? I thought that something like that happened.
Yes, some of them were brought back, mostly junior officers. Someone like Ukiwe, although he was in the Navy, was brought back. There were a couple of them. No, my father was not. My father was dismissed without benefits. Some of them were removed, but they were given benefits. But my father was not given anything. I think when Obasanjo was in power after my father passed, I think there was some pressure on him to give back recognition to my father and stuff like that. But at that point, I really didn't care, to give him anything in death. You could have given that to him when he was alive, So I don't go around saying thank you to anybody for anything that they may have given to my father after he died.
So you made reference to Nigeria today in terms of referring to Gowon and his people, what has happened to his people after the war and after the effort to keep Nigeria one. I wanted to extend it to the general picture of things in Nigeria today. You already said that we are not safer. Do you think that war accomplished anything, even for those who fought to keep Nigeria one and for those who wanted to leave?
Yeah. People don't have to occupy the same geographical space to get along. And if living in that geographical space is going to create conflicts, there's no benefit to living together. You are an Igbo man, I'm an Ibibio man. If you look at the history of Igbos and Ibibios, we've been very, very close. We're not that close now that we have our own states that we're under Nigeria. There's a long-standing history of Ibibios and Igbos, even I'm talking of before colonialism, when there was a lot of cooperation and interaction and trade. And if you look at your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents, including mine, a lot of them could speak both languages. That's the history. So the one Nigeria thing, I think we should remember that, first of all, Isaac Boro had tried to break away. Remember when he tried to create his Niger Delta Republic? The second coup plotters, that was one of their goals, and people don't want to talk about it. It was to avenge the first coup, retaliate, and then the North would separate. That was the original plan. But you had what they called senior permanent or federal permanent secretaries, and the British saying, no, don't do that. Of course, because you lose out on the oil. So no, we're not more united now. I don't see it. All I see is more chaos, animosity. Doesn't mean that we're not getting along as individuals, but I'm talking of getting along on an institutional level. I can laugh with anybody and you be friends with anybody from any ethnic group, but the moment there are elections, for instance, then we become we take loyalty with our identity groups. Individual friendship is no longer an issue. You have that across Nigeria. This divisions, animosity, whether it's not just the Middle Belt, look at what's happening in the North. And it's not just on account of ethnicity, it's on account of religion as well. No, we're not more united. I believe that was we're not one Nigeria. I believe that was your question.
You talked about the relationship between the BBOs and the Igbo people.
Yeah.
There's this what happened after the war. I wasn't there before. I don't know if you can maybe talk on that. The relationship in the eastern part of the country, what they call the eastern region, and what changed. Looking at the Ikwere, for instance, the Ikwere people now and the identity issue. What can you say about that and how it happened?
Yeah, it's part of the sad impact of ethnic politics across what used to be the eastern region. We used to be very united. If you travel from, say, Ikorekpene to Umuahia, there used to be places that were like gray areas. You had the Anang people and Igbo people living together, and you didn't know who was who because everybody spoke the other person's language. We were like that. If you look at the uprising by women in the former eastern region, you had women from Opobo, from Etinan, you had Efik women, you had Igbo women participating, and many others, Ikwere women. You even have monuments built to those women in places like Ikorabasi in my state. But the propaganda, pre-war, wartime, and post-war propaganda was fierce against the Igbos. And the Igbos have now been made enemies. And many of us have refused to see things differently or to do our research and find the facts and recognize that we had always lived as a family. The propaganda was fierce. The Ikwere people, linguistically and culturally, are tied to Igbo people. And yet, why, instead of being family, why do you have a lot of people on either side, condemning the other group and acting as if, we're enemies, when in fact you're part of the same family? You look at Opobo. Opobo was even founded by an Igbo person. You go to Cross River State in Calabar, there's a place called Ikot-Ishi. When you say Ikot in my area, it means literally bush, but it means the land of Ishi. I believe in one variation of the Igbo language, Ishi means 6. Ikot-Ishi in Calabar is made up of descendants of Igbos. In fact, descendants of Igbos that were used in the plantation slave industry, unfortunately. But it has never created chaos. It has never created conflict. We've always lived in harmony. And if you look at the history of Igbos generally, of course you have Igbos that may be prejudiced against other people, but you never have had a situation of Igbos rising up against any ethnic group in Igbo land and forcefully sending them away violently. It's never happened. For the most part, Igbo people have lived in harmony with other people. And when Igbo people moved around, and they've done it more than other people, to other parts of Nigeria, they settled in well, embraced the cultures, learned the languages, and assimilated. So it's unfortunate what's happening now across the eastern region. It really is.
One thing I missed was the surrender papers. Some scholars are saying that there were conditions when your father surrendered and announced that Biafra has ceased to exist. What does that mean? What do you understand about the conditions for that surrender?
Okay, I'm actually looking at a copy of the document which I have. I'm looking at an original copy. And I'm going to read, there's A, B, C, D. I'm going to read from C, that any future constitutional arrangement will be worked out by representatives of the people of Nigeria. That's not surrender. And there's no part of the document that's titled surrender. This is a document that basically says, fine, we're not fighting anymore, but we have to come together and give everybody the constitutional opportunity and right to determine what's best for all of us. Not one group of people controlling the narrative, or certain oligarchs controlling the narrative, or certain politicians, or certain powerful or large ethnic groups. So no, it was not. It was conditional. It was not unconditional. And in another interview, which is not a part of this document, my father had said, if you don't treat former Biafrans right, they will rise up again. They will rise up in agitation and demand their rights, which is what's happening today.
Yes, I actually wanted you to weigh in on the new agitation for return to Biafra. It's been going on for a while now. We had Wazulike-led movement for the restoration of the sovereign state of Biafra. Moved on to people like Nnamdi Kanu, Simon Ekpa. When you watch this, what does that say to you, and how do you see this new movement towards Biafra?
Yeah, I think when we look at these demands, agitations, even though the word Biafra is used, what these people, and most of them are young people, are saying is that we are marginalized and we need to be included. We're marginalized and we don't have a place in this country. Nobody's investing in our education. People are not investing in our talents and skills. And if, as long as we continue to feel marginalized, we're not going to go anywhere. And so we are demanding our own space, which is what Biafra was about. The situation is slightly different. And so I think it's best, first of all, to recognize that this is not just about Biafra. This is about self-determination. And this is what people are asking for. You may put certain phrases on it, like Biafra, IPOB, Oduduwa movement. It boils down to the same thing. The one thing, there are a couple of things that I'm not happy about. One is when, for instance, in IPOB, when I hear about their conflicts with Ohanese, it doesn't go well. It doesn't sit well with me. We should understand that disagreements will always be there where you have human beings, but you must take Ohanese seriously, because a lot of people in Ohanese were, like me, young people during the war, and some of them are old enough that they fought during the war. So they may not be completely in agreement with you, but don't dismiss them. So I don't like those conflicts. And I also don't like conflicts, and some of them are not documented. I can't say that they're happening. I've heard about people talk about a young man, I think he's in Finland, Simon Ekpa, and some other groups. I've heard things about money being misused. I don't have facts, but when you begin to hear about some of these things, conflicts, disagreements, they're not inspirational, because you ask yourself, if we're like this now, where we haven't gotten our country, how would we manage that country? So these are some of the things that bother me. And unfortunately, because the ethnic politics and the propaganda was played out so effectively, what used to be the original Biafra has been lost. And that is a Biafra that involved people from various ethnicities. Now people associate Biafra and IPOB with the Igbo people. So that in itself, that lack of unity that used to exist is a problem. And so I will always still be supportive of these young people. I will speak with them, and I've been invited to. And of course, I condemn in no uncertain terms the violence that has been used against them, including the violence that is constantly being used against Nnamdi Kanu, whose incarceration is unjust. I will condemn those things. There's no room for that. We've adopted a philosophy of aggression. Whenever you want something, you use aggression. And there were opportunities to dialogue with these young people, and that was not done. From the beginning, violence has been used against them, and it's still being used against them.
Mm-hmm. Quickly, because we are running out of time. I know you can spend your time with us, but I wanted to say, is there a message you want to pass on to people who are trying to find Biafra, a new Biafra, based on the experience of what happened during that time? Any message as a kid growing up in Biafra, what you went through? Is there anything that would be like a lesson for those who are thinking about the new Biafra?
Well, the old Biafra, there was a promise. And the promise was, if you try to do this, we'll use violence against you. And violence was used in ways that violence has never been used in Nigeria. So these young people need to prepare for that. When they come attacking you, don't say, oh, this is democracy, we can speak out and demand our rights. Yes, you do. But you also have undemocratic systems in place that are still being used. And one of them is aggression. So it's important to think through the consequences of your demands and maybe think about other ways of approaching your vision, your dreams, your demands, and also think about how can we now change the narrative so that young people everywhere, not just young people, not just Igbo people, understand that this is about all of us. This is about our repression, our oppression, our marginalization. This is about young people and conscientious people across the country. How can you bring them in? Because right now, isolating just any ethnic group, I don't think is helping. It's helping the vision or the process.
A friend of mine wrote a book called "We Are All Biafrans." When you hear something like that, is that what you are referring to?
I mean, we can use that. We can say we're all Biafrans, but if people choose to use a different designation, respect them. And when we say we're all Biafrans, where does the word Biafra come from? So you can say that if Biafra is symbolic of self-determination. You see, if people ask me, are you a Biafran? I say, I have the Biafran spirit in me. That's different from saying I'm a Biafran. I have the Biafran spirit in me means I have in me, or at least I embrace the Biafran spirit of creativity, of standing up for justice, of surviving, of speaking truth to power, of being strong. Those were all attributes of Biafra. And that's what I tell people all the time. I don't necessarily say I'm a Biafran. I did have a Biafran passport, and if you call me Biafran, I won't be offended. But more importantly, I prefer to be called a person who has the Biafran spirit in me, which I will always, always have, and nothing will stop me from having it.
You still have the passport?
No. It would have been nice, right?
Yes. Now, one last question from me. We get our people in. I know next time we will talk about your teaching experiences, and we're over 90 minutes and we've not talked to the people or waiting. But let me say, your father, towards the end of his life, what was his feeling about Nigeria and the role he played in the country's history?
My father believed when he joined the army, that he was there to participate in a key part of nation building, which is protecting the people, providing security. He was very disillusioned with the coups, and increasingly we became more corrupt. I'm sorry to say, more divided. He still had hope, but he was also very disappointed. And as at the time he passed on, I think he would have lived much longer. I think mentally he was completely, I don't know the word to use, he was completely deflated. And seeing all the things that were going on, abuse of power, mismanagement of resources, he remained hopeful, but that's all I can say. He remained hopeful, but he wasn't happy. He was really, really traumatized by not just his life, but what was happening nationally.
Did you reconnect with Ojukwu?
Before the war, during the war, they were always part of the same profession. I don't know that there was the personal friendship. Yes, he did connect, but when you say connect, I'm not sure on what levels. I think I think my mother's sister, for instance, was probably closer to Ojukwu than my father, because ironically, my mother's sister had known him when they were young people. But he was he remained cordial, and he was part of the process of Ojukwu's eventual pardon. I know he visited him in the Ivory Coast and was instrumental in that process. So he held, there were no ill feelings, and I would say, yes, they were connected, but I don't know the extent of intimacy that existed between them.
All right. Thank you so much. We will bring you back when your new book comes out. But in the meantime, let's get our people who have been waiting patiently. This is the longest I've talked to a guest before bringing them in. Oji, Mr. Oji, Dr. Oji, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. I hope my mic is on. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much. Nice to see you, Professor Effiong. I really don't know where to start. Because Dr. Damages is laughing because, he knows I was of that era. Okay, I'm probably a little older than you. Yeah, I was a class 3 student at Cooperative School, Port Harcourt, when this was all happening. But even before I go, let me tell you that we hold our father, we hold his memory in the highest regard. Wherever that man is, he will be at peace. He was a great man. May God bless him. We will never forget. On a second level, there's a lot between you and I. I'm from Arochukwu. I'm from our movie. From my house to Aguiyi-Ironsi, I can walk 10 minutes in one direction. I am in Aguiyi-Ironsi state.
Yes.
So there's a lot between us. For example, look at my name. My Igbo name is Okobasi. Obasi is from, so there, just to say that there's just a lot between our peoples. And I know that there are so many people here, so I haven't come to give a lecture or say anything. Maybe at a good time, I will get your address and I will send you my copy of my own recollections about the war. First is last. I just released it last year. But I know that many people, almost everybody here probably may have the Biafran side or so, whatever. But I want to take a little bit of, am I lost?
No, you're here.
Okay, maybe then my screen just kind of went blank. Okay, but that's okay. So I can just keep talking so long as you guys.
We can see you, but now you are frozen.
Recently, former Nigeria Foreign Minister, Dr. Aguiyi-Ironsi, he said something on Arise TV, which had to do with how the British, wouldn't really, after the Indians, they wouldn't allow anybody to have independence unless they controlled those people. So that by the time Nigeria had independence, they didn't really hand over Nigeria to the Azikiwes, the Awolowos, or Okparas. They knew who they could control. So setting that up, please bear with me. Whatever we are doing now is what we will call Monday morning quarterbacking, so we can say. So my problem is I wanted to focus on this issue that Ojukwu had no alternative than to declare Biafra. We were all in support of Biafra. Please bear with me. I'm not trying to condemn Ojukwu. I'm only trying to play Monday morning quarterback. Today, if you look at what happens in the world, power speaks. Was there any way? In other words, I keep asking myself, what I know today, thinking back, didn't we have anybody who knew then what I know now? Because what I know now, if I were to use it to advise Ojukwu, secession was not an option. Whatever the Igbos could have gotten without the war could have been better than where we are now. So with that in mind, and again, just one more aspect of it before I stop, because I know I'm talking too long. One more aspect of it was this question that it wasn't an Igbo coup, and whatever IBB is saying now or so, I really don't care. But look at it this way. Suppose you were a Hausa man, and you woke up the morning of January 17th or 16th, the day following the coup. Aguiyi-Ironsi, what is his name? Tafawa Balewa was gone. Sardauna was gone. There are two gods. And no Igbo man.
Yes.
What would you think? I'm not saying that made it an Igbo coup. I'm only just trying to play the devil's advocate. So thank you so much. If you can address those 2 points, the second one being this question of Igbo coup or no Igbo coup, and my previous point being whether there was no other alternative.
That's right.
Because right now, I probably belong to those who think, maybe we couldn't have gone to war. We could have. I knew we were mistreated. I was a class 3 student then in government college, so I think I knew a little bit.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. In hindsight, a lot of these things, make sense. And, General Ojukwu could have accepted appointment to be the governor of his central state. And the Aburi Accord was reneged, but not every section of it. So I spoke with this man before he died, Colonel Achuzie, and he told me that, if they had known, they would have gone with at least some aspects of the Aburi Accord. So absolutely, you're right. There is no doubt that may have been an option, and it probably would have saved lives in hindsight. While I agree with you, I'm still not going to fault anyone, because as you're looking at people who were like in their early 30s, and how did they see the world? What did they really understand? So yes, that may have been a better option, and people like Nzogu, who was in Biafra, did not agree with it. And prior to my father arriving in the eastern region, they had spoken about secession and agreed that it was not going to be an option. So why it eventually became an option, I think, is a conversation that would take too long right now. But I am agreeing with you, especially with your knowledge and experience, Dr. Orji. The other thing about the Igbo coup, there's no doubt that was the impression. And if I was a northerner, I may have reacted the same way. It's not only the prime minister and the northern premier that were killed. Every top northern officer was killed in that coup. 4 of them. Mai Malari, Pam, Lagema, and there's another name I'm not remembering. So absolutely, you're right. So when people say that, we can't fault them as human beings. I think most human beings would react the same way. Yeah. So that's my response. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. G. Let's go to Michael. Michael, you're next.
Thank you, Dr. Damages. Thank you so much for having me. Professor Philip, I'm glad to have you and see you on this platform. It's a pleasure meeting you. First of all, before I go further, I want to recognize yesterday was the International Women's Day, and this month of March is Women. So we give grace to our mothers for what they've been doing.
Yes.
So, Professor Oji, I mean, it's a lot, and I know I wasn't in that part of Nigeria when they happened. I was in Lagos, but we can see the effect of what happened at that time. So there's no doubt about it, because every time we hear the plane flying, they tell us, turn off the light, hide under the bed. And you know, that time there was no bomb bunker in Nigeria at that time. You use your house as your bunker. So that's over. So my question to you is this, and looking back at the past of Nigerian disputes and contention and tribal conflict, when we look at that and we see this agitation coming from different parts of Nigeria, how, I know you've answered some of this question, how do we go forward to see how we can unite as a nation? I know the fragmentation of Nigeria has been created by the outsiders. I don't want to name them. They know what they did. They know what they did just to make sure when we are sleeping, fighting, they'll be digging the resources. That's what their main target and goal.
Yeah.
When you guys are sleeping, fighting each other, we're going to be taking your. So that was their main.
That's right.
But yes, but now we come to this point, because as old I am, I hope that Nigeria will become a nation where my children born here can go back or look forward to it and say, yes, I want to go back to my father country and contribute. But I don't see it happening because of the political situation. And all I'm hearing is this agitation from people because people are being marginalized because of who they belong to, that tribe, because Yoruba nation. And I told them, I said, before you guys asking a clamor from Yoruba nation, what are your target unity among yourself first?
Yes.
You have to unify yourself with a force in order to say, I want to be on my own. Because at the end of the day, you become state, you get the nation. The Ijabu will say, why are you Ijabuma? The Jeshama will say, oh, I want. So you need to have a what we call a fundamental, a concrete point where the unity can stay. Because I see too among the Igbo that are not saying Igbo this, and I find this fragmentation is a dispute, is creating. Okay, how do you get over it? So that's my question to you, and please just explain further to that, and then let's see how. Because to me, when I come to this one, Dr. I always want solution, rather than going back to the history. We already know the history. Moving forward, we need solution. And to us, tomorrow, our children will play back this section we're creating now, and they will say, "Oh, somebody say this idea. So why can't we work on it?" So that's my question, Professor Philip. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Let me state that the review at the back of my book, the 2 reviews are by Yoruba people, which says a lot. This is a story. I belong to a group called the Fatherland Group, and we believe that what people want more than anything else is autonomy. And we look at the example of Britain, where Scotland is under Britain, Ireland is under Britain, but they have their autonomy. I think that for me, that would work better than just completely fragmenting. Because if you fragment, like you said, there are Igbo people from Abriba that may have problems with people from Bise. There are Efik people who may have problems with the Bibio people. So the fragmentation may not work, but I think if there's a system in place, there's no reason why the oil resources from my land has to be controlled by someone who doesn't know anything about my people, or knows nothing about, or cares nothing about us. I think that's what we're agitating for. A lot of us anyway. There's no reason why a child in Port Harcourt or in Okrika should be sitting on the floor in their classroom. So I'm in agreement with you that if you fragment, you'll have to keep on fragmenting until maybe we'll exist independently as individuals, because you will always find disagreements within groups, even those that appear to come from the same ethnic group. Like you've mentioned, the Yoruba, it's the same across. So I agree with the fact that maybe not complete separation, but a means of establishing greater autonomy for people so that we can be in control of our destiny, our environment, our resources. I don't need someone from Zaria doing that for me. I think, that's how I look at this. I remember these are my opinions, so I expect people to be in disagreement. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Let's go to Chim. Chim, you are next. Welcome.
Thank you, Rudolf. Beautiful one you've accomplished today. Another feather to your cap for bringing Professor Effiong here. And Prof, it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance virtually.
Thank you.
I want to say thank you very much for the very balanced perspective you've given us this afternoon. I've read several books about the Nigerian Civil War, from Elechi Amadi's Sunset at Dawn. That was practically my very first book about Biafra. Then I read Frederick Forsyth. And once people accused Frederick of being a bit biased because he was friends with Ojukwu and all that. Yeah. But the question I want to ask you is on the issue of the component of Biafra. So when this whole killings happened in the north, I know the Igbos are the dominant group in what constituted the old Biafra. I get it. But when people talk about, they don't say Eastern region. We keep hearing the word Igbos. But I know that there were Ibibios like you and your father and other Ibibios and, Anangs, Efiks, even the Ikweres, people who were not, who were being killed. So I want to have a sense, in that Biafra, was there a feeling that the Igbos were too domineering? And as a result, perhaps the other ethnic groups in one way or the other, sabotaged the process and all that? Or was there that real harmony, and whatever splinters we're experiencing today is just a function of the after effects of having lost the war and people, taking advantage of the people who, quote and unquote, have been conquered?
Yeah, thank you very much. In the North, you're absolutely right. The massacre by Northerners, they didn't know who was Igbo. If you were from the East, they just called you, was it Nyamiri or whatever? About a third of the people killed were not Igbos, actually. And if you look at the coup itself, among the military officers, there were people like Major Isong, Major Ekanem, who were killed. And of course, Effiong would have been one of them. What eventually happened, the creation of states was the first step towards marginalizing Igbos and saying, these people have been controlling you, but here's your own state. Now you can be autonomous, which never happened, because coming from whether it's Southeastern or Akwa Ibom state, I'm not in control. I'm not autonomous. Someone else is running the affairs of my state. And it's even with elections, we know that someone outside of Akwa Ibom can decide on any given day who's going to be the governor, not the people themselves. But as the war progressed, this propaganda that demonized Igbos was carried on through the war, because as non-Igbo areas were captured, the tendency was for the people to survive by submitting to the Nigerian side. And then they were described as traitors, or what they used to call Sabo during the war. And so if Biafra recaptured those areas, they went after the Sabo, which were non-Igbos, and that just aggravated the conflict between non-Igbos and Igbos. And even my father's younger brother, Philip Effiong, who fought for Biafra, at some point a vigilante group stopped him and some Biafran soldiers as they escaped from Ikot to Umuahia. And because he didn't speak Igbo, he was almost killed. But they convinced the vigilante group that this is Effiong's brother. That's why his life was saved. So it's a situation that started before the war. The propaganda was fierce. It carried on into the war. And I'm trying to summarize this because it's a lot deeper, but it remains with us to this day. Like Dr. Oji has said, you had arrows, the Arrow people, you're even talking about crossing a few miles. The Arrows were a part of my state. They were not just people who came in from outside. If you look at Igbo people, you have Igbo society. You have Igbo society among our people. You have names like Abasi. That's the history. But the history and what obtains today are completely different, unfortunately.
All right. Thank you, Chim. Let's go to the next person, and that will be Ike. Ike, welcome to the show.
Yeah, good afternoon, Dr. Damages. Good afternoon, Prof. Happy to see you and happy for you to be in our midst today.
Okay.
First of all, I want to pay my respect to your dad.
Okay.
May his gentle soul continue to rest in peace. For me, it's only appreciation that I've come to be part of this platform today to thank you and your family for the sacrifices you make, your dad make, and your family as a whole. For we, the Biafrans, in the days of the war, and even after the war. And also to thank you for speaking truth to power, based on your own experience. Just want to thank you for everything, for what your dad did for every Biafran. We can't bring him back, but I know that wherever he is, every living Biafran is grateful, and we'll continue to remember him for the sacrifices he has made for every one of us that are still living and those that are passed on. Based on what you have been saying and your own experience, my only question is concerning the 3R: reconstruction, rehabilitation. Is it reconstruction, rehabilitation, and
reintegration?
Reintegration. Based on your experience, and based on the present day Nigeria we call our country, what is your opinion? Have the 3R, have we gotten anything closer to that 3R presently as the Nigeria, the country we are called today?
Yeah.
Where do you think that 3R is up to today?
Yeah. I personally, I've never experienced it. I don't know if anybody else experienced it. You know, you had bank accounts that our people had before the war in different parts of Nigeria. You never got that money back. We were given 20 pounds to survive after the war. The 20 pounds many people didn't get. You know about the abandoned property initiative. People lost property, lost businesses. I've not felt it. Maybe some people have. I know what happened to my father. I've mentioned it during the earlier conversations, how he had to struggle, and along with my mother, and up until when my mother passed last year. You know, it was nothing but a struggle, and it's just miracles, God's grace and determination that has brought us where we are. I'm not just talking about my family, but people who were part of the Biafra experience. Eventually, you had to rebuild your lives on your own. You had to reinvent yourselves. You had to find a way to establish businesses, to re-educate yourselves. It was a long, hard journey, but it was not through the 3Rs that you accomplished that. And I think one of the lessons there is that in the end, you should not rely on anybody else, especially people who don't like you, to help you rebuild your lives. We did it on our own. It started during the war. There was a lot of independence that was created among Biafran peoples when it came to survival during the war. And like you know, people went back to traditional ways of doing things to survive. It wasn't the 3Rs, I'm sorry to say. To this day, I know that as long as my name is Philip Effiong, I will not be engaged in any way in Nigeria that would give me a degree of political or economic power. People have even told me, use your middle name. And for that reason, I've decided to keep this name, just to make a point that you will not hold me back. And so I'm not dependent on the 3Rs. And I don't think you, Mr. Alamefula, I don't think you were dependent on it. I don't think your family or your community was dependent on it. Unless I think that's the mindset I want to be in, not to rely on other people, especially people who I don't believe appreciate me or appreciate you or appreciate us. So no, to the 3Rs, maybe someone else had a different experience, but I don't trust it. I don't care about it, and it's not a part of my life.
Going forward, sir, sorry, Dr. Damages, healing, going forward from your own experience, what do you think healing and reconciliation will look like in Nigeria based on what we saw in South Africa? What your own experience? What do you think? Because we are talking about going forward. How do you think reconciliation, healing, forgiveness, and let go? Yeah. Which is the barometer would be the best for Nigeria as a country?
Absolutely. First of all, from our end, we've forgiven. You know, if you look at, say, what's happening in the Middle Belt, we're not the ones killing people there. If you look at northern Nigeria, we're not Boko Haram. We've forgiven, but we have a right to feel pain and to be angry. But I think we've forgiven. You know, to achieve reconciliation, first of all, you have to acknowledge the harm that you committed. Nigeria has never done that. You have to create trust. Trust was never created when you look at programs like abandoned property. And we're supposed to be collectively involved in developing Nigeria, but for the most part, we've been excluded. You know, we don't enjoy political power. It's the progeny of the winners of the war that have ruled Nigeria, and for the most part, they've excluded us, even though we have a few people in elite positions. There was never an attempt to counsel people who suffered the war, no treatment programs, and no education. If anything else, we've tried to prevent people from knowing about this history because we don't want to accept the evil that we did. And so we've eliminated this subject from our school curriculum. So until all of these are achieved, there can't be true reconciliation, I don't think. The Oputa panel was set up 1999, 2002, a report was given to Obasanjo. What did he do with the report? I don't know.
All right. Thank you, Ike. And let's go to Okija. Now, Okija, you're next.
Professor Effiong, thank you for coming. I appreciate what you have said today a lot. And to be honest with you, I was born years after the Civil War, but somehow, you know, I had a lot of conversation with you know, older people, and somehow I have the trauma because certain things they told me, you know, sometimes in my life you know, they come. I remember, you know, when you were talking about, you know, being airlifted, you know, there was like a grand cousin, you know, my mother's cousin that was airlifted, and because due to, you know, Kwashoko, and eventually after the war they were still looking for her to bring her back from Gabon, whatever. And someone that was helping with the operation died in 1979. Road accident, you know, in the process trying to get, you know, the girl back, and they stopped, you know. And then there were so many issues. You know, I remember, you know, I saw some grave, you know, in my community, and I asked who died. They said that, oh no, he died during the war. I said they brought back his body. They said no. They said they had to, you know, they've had to figure out where he died, and then they had to use palm frond, go there, you know, put it on the ground, then bring back and bury it, you know, the palm frond. So a lot of, so, you know, trauma, you know, they talk about. I remember I was talking. These people, they were older people. They were trying to catch this thing that looked like a rat. So I was like, you know, why would you eat this? They said, no, this is not rat. And then they started laughing at me. I was like, you know, why are you laughing at me? They said, oh, they ate was this. They didn't know that this rat would still be in Igbo land after the war because they ate. They said they ate everything. So I mean, just to picture me eating lizard, I just, you know, can't imagine me eating lizard. But these people ate. They said they ate all the lizard. There was no more lizard.
Mm.
And you know, that's, you know, takes me to my question. How do you saw these things? I didn't see it, but I just watching the video, you know, your father. How do you deal with the trauma you yourself when you saw this, you know? And you mentioned something about you know, no help for people to go through, you know, emotional healing, you know, psychological healing.
Yeah.
How do you deal with it, you know, as someone who saw these things, and then with your father, you know, you remember, you know, like a man, he was, I'm not going to say that, I'm not going to, he was a proud person, but I'm not going to say, kind of somehow broken by what happened in Biafra, you know. How do you, you know, deal with all these things yourself?
Yeah.
And also, sorry, Rudolf, second question. Who gave him the name, the last Biafran soldier? I think, you know, it was called Last Biafran Soldier. Did he take the name, you know, like he was the last Biafran soldier?
Okay. The last Biafran soldier. I don't know. I'm just hearing that actually. But the one thing I can tell you is that my father never apologized or regrets his role in Biafra, because it was all about self. It was all about protect. It was a trained military officer. So when the enemy came with their bombs and guns, he had a responsibility to protect the people, especially civilians. I don't know if he was the last Biafran soldier, because there were many that were there with him. As far as trauma, yes, it's transgenerational. Even if you were not born then, you will feel the trauma. whether you like it or not. As far as surviving the trauma, what has helped me the most is writing. You've got to let it out. And I appreciate what Rudolf has done today, because these conversations also helped me. The other thing is community. We never really had access to facilities. You know, in America, you hear about healthcare, counseling. What we had was community. And we had a strong sense of community. I hope it still exists. And through community, we encouraged and supported one another. But the trauma will never go away. It can only be handled. And that's what I do with that trauma. I handle it, but the images are still there. And the pains, not just of the war, people forget post-war, that the pains are just as much. And sometimes people suffer more post-war. The war lasted 2.5 years. The post-war is still with us today. But it's really the ability to communicate, to write, and community. And the encouragement. You know, when you come out and say, your father, we appreciate him, I look back and say, it was not all in vain. That is also a source of strength for me. And it is ironic that a lot of times the appreciation for my father comes not from necessarily his ethnic group, but from outside of his ethnic group. What does that tell us? It tells us that ethnicity is important, but what's most important to people is when you're treated with dignity. And when your lives are treated as sacred, then you appreciate the person who treats you like that, regardless of ethnic origins or identity.
All right, thank you, Okija. Let's go to the next person. I think it's Jefferson. Jefferson, you are next.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, very good. Philip Effiong in the flesh, Jr. It's a pleasure to meet you in person. It's also a pleasure to be associated to know you, that you are the son of Philip Effiong, who fought side by side with Ojukwu. I will reiterate again that may his soul rest in perfect peace.
Thank you.
You know, I'm happy that you are actually here and explaining things to people. You know, I had experience going to QIT one time, and I noticed the name similarities between people in the South. That's the people from Akwa Ibom. The names, I noticed some Igbo relationship between our culture and that of the Southeast. Sometimes I even confront people who are from your state, Akwa Ibom, and they will tell you, oh, they are not associated with us. All because of misunderstanding. At a point, even people from Rivers State and Bayelsa, they'll feel that, oh, they have nothing to do with the Southeast. We don't have anything. That when they did the Biafra thing, that they just forced us in. And I'm like, wow. Even me, I never understood that Biafra was beyond Igbo until recently. I started doing my own personal research, and I'm proud I did it. You know, before our very eyes, I can remember even on this platform, people will say there's no relationship with the Southeast and some South states. What do you mean? Are you trying to force people inside and all of that? But now the truth is evolving by itself. Even people, because it has been discovered now that even from those states, that people are actually finding out that their fathers lied to them. Fathers lied. Yes, fathers lied to them literally just because of morsel of bread.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. It's extremely unfortunate. So I want to just move to some very critical questions. We all know how the state of the country is. Sorry, Rudolf, I'll soon be done.
Yeah, just make it one, please, so that we can get to other people.
Don't worry, I'll make it a very big jumbo pack of a question. I'll ask it and put it together. So, what is your take regarding the current state of the Nigerian situation, considering in fact that up till now we have still not recovered from the trauma, and some people feel that the Igbos can never have any political relevance, even the South in the Nigerian state? What is your take? Because why I'm asking these questions, because even on this commentary just now, just look at the commentary, you see that people are still acting immature, and we are still exchanging this banter, which is to say we didn't learn anything. And also, what is your take regarding the statement that Babangida made, because it was obvious that when he made those statements regarding that it was not an Igbo coup, yet some people are still living in denial. But the truth has actually been left out. So I want you to expatiate on what your take is regarding the state of the union and what will it do for we within the Biafra, let me say the eastern region, for us to recover and have a progressive front. I want to stop there for now because of the question situation. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think the question of Igbo coup, I think we already talked about that quite extensively. Yeah, you know, there may be that impression initially, and we can't deny that. But the truth is that it wasn't. But you know, so I'll just move on to the whole thing about the union, and you know, I don't think Igbo people care that much about relying on government for anything. I think Igbo people have gone past that. Igbo people have a right to to benefit from governance as citizens of that country, as tax-paying citizens. But I think Igbo people also have a level of autonomy, which basically means whether you give it to us or not, whether you recognize us or not, we are going to move forward and develop, which has happened. You can't talk about the arts, music, science, healthcare, sports without seeing the tremendous achievements of Igbos, and I should add other Easterners who were victims of that conflict. As far as whether Igbo person will become president and all of that, you know, you mentioned the disunity, which we mentioned before, across the former Eastern region. It's there. And I've seen people even from my state who said they will absolutely not vote for an Igbo person, you know, because of what we've already talked about. And yet, you know, I don't know if any of you traveled to the Calabar, passed through Margaret Ekpo airport. Margaret Ekpo, where is she from? She's an Igbo woman. She's an Igbo woman. I've talked about the uprising in 1929. You know, my father was born in Aba. His father could speak quite a bit of Igbo. You know, all these things we need to, you said, how do we get back to recovering that sense of harmony, education? I'm not talking of classroom education. I'm talking of knowledge, which may have to be achieved outside of the classroom. But I have Igbo cousins. You know, my cousins are from Amobia. You know, and that's who we really are. All this fragmentation is not who we are. And when you mention parents lying to their children, absolutely, just to reinforce the fact that these are not our people, they are enemies. But how low can you get, and what is that doing for us? Our disunity is part of our problem. Our self-hatred. Who's taking advantage? We talk about the Fulani. When you compare the Fulani, I'm not dismissing them. When you look at their achievements, their resourcefulness, can they compare with us? Are they better than us? So how come they continue to rule over us? That's a question for everybody to answer.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jefferson.
Thank you so much. Oh, you're welcome.
All right. So the next person is Bob Chisco. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Rudolf. Prof, I say you're highly welcome to the show. In fact, I have keenly listened to you like I was in the classroom. You are a true son of your father, a chief from an old block. Your dad forever remains a hero in the annals of Biafran history. It's unfortunate that today history has been removed from the curriculum of Nigerian secondary school education. God knows what the government is hiding, that the people should not know what happened and what led to what happened. To me, Nigeria is the way it is today because since after the war, no successive government had deemed it fit to designate, even if it's just a day, to talk about the war and apologize to the Igbos about the needless invasion of our land. My question goes this way. Wouldn't you think that today, Gowon, seeing how the country he fought so hard to keep as one, had degenerated worse than he so desired? If your answer is in the affirmative, wouldn't you think Gowon should have been bold enough to apologize to the Igbos and Nigeria at large about the war? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's part of the process of healing. I don't know if you watched the Truth, what was it, the Truth Commission in South Africa. De Klerk came out and said he didn't know what was happening, during apartheid. He didn't know all the killings and the tortures. That's not going to create healing. And I watched a little bit of the Oputa panel, but I didn't care about a lot of it, because you had people coming and justifying their actions during the war. I don't think they're going to apologize. It's too much pride to apologize. And for you to come out and say, I was part of a campaign that lasted 2.5 years and took the lives of about 2 million or more innocent people, mostly children. It takes a certain kind of individual to do that. But it would actually lead to, it would be refreshing. And I think it would be a good step towards healing. It's not going to happen. And for the most part, Gowon is silent on what's happening in his area right now for good reason. He can't talk about what's happening in the Middle Belt without talking about the war. So I think that's why he's avoiding that conversation, because he has to admit that one, Nigeria was not the real goal. We failed and we destroyed too much during that period, both property and lives. So yes, to your question, yes, healing, apologies and accepting that you caused harm would go a long way in bringing about healing, but I don't expect it and I'm not relying on it. As a matter of fact, let me just say that me personally, and I'm not speaking for all Nigerians, I'm not putting my fate, my destiny in the hands of Nigeria. From when I was a teenager, I gave up. I'm sorry to say, I'm not giving up on Nigeria or Nigerians. I'm giving up on giving my fate, putting my fate, my destiny in the hands of Nigeria.
All right. Thank you, Bob. Let's go to Omori. You're next. Prof, we're about to round up. I have one more person. I know this has lasted longer than we agreed. Go ahead, Comrade Omori.
Yeah, good afternoon, Prof. It's good to have you. Last time we met was in Sugarland, somewhere in Texas, close to Houston.
Oh, okay.
And I was the one that picked you from the airport to the venue.
Yeah. I remember. Yeah.
Good to see you again, man.
Good to see you.
It's always a pleasure having you. One of the things you hammered on that, my takeaway from your lecture on that day was the need for us to close ranks and view the unity among the people, But considering what is going on something happened recently. Babangida came up with his lies in form of a book launch. And people were donating billions of naira, and they were applauding him for his evil and crime against humanity. And after the launch, people will be I want to assume that we, the victims of their crime, were busy fighting among ourselves. Do you think we have learned anything from the mistake that were made that led to the civil war and the first coup and the counter coup and all that? Instead of we the people, for example, I'm from somewhere in Nigeria. I see myself as a victim of a war I was never part and parcel of. I didn't know what happened during the war. I have a guy here that was very close to me. We were very close. Sometimes I go there to repair, just to while away time, hang out with them. Because of something, a role that was played by somebody from my ethnic group, who does not even know whether I exist or not, he sees me as as an enemy. Do you think our healing, our healing and genuine reconciliation can come from people who profiteer from our disunity, because their tactics is divide and rule brought by the colonial, by the colonialists, and take it to another, consolidated by our oppressors. Do you think genuine reconciliation and healing can come from those that profited from our disunity? They want to divide us. They want to do everything to divide us. And is it a good thing for us to be fighting among us instead of learning from the mistakes of the past and closing ranks so that we will not make another mistake among us? I see all of us as victims of a war we're never part of.
No.
So my another question is, after the war, after the war, Ojukwu was already in charge. I mean, before the war, he was already in charge of the eastern region. Do you think it was necessary for Ojukwu? Do you think it would be better for Ojukwu to, defend his eastern territory instead of heading to Lagos? Do you think that was an error? Crossing Edo towards or even advancing towards Ogun State, if not for the compromise along the line. Do you think that was a mistake? Instead of blowing up the Niger Bridge and thinking of defending the Eastern Territory? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a lot of questions. My first response is we can't rely on people who have sought to divide us to bring about a restoration. No, we can't. I've talked about disunity. We need to go through a process of renewed education and practical education to regain what we had in terms of unity and harmony. And we have a lot more in common across the eastern, or what used to be the eastern region, than differences. When you talk about, someone doing something from your ethnic group and it's being held against everybody from your ethnic group, I understand that, because in Uwe Makwan's book, New York, My Village, he talks about atrocities committed in Biafra in non-Igbo areas by Biafrans. But you can't fault Biafra or all Igbos for those atrocities, because those were not a part of the Biafran policy. Those were individuals who were just simply criminal. And let's remember that before wars, people are criminal. Wars give criminals the audacity to do things that they might have found difficult doing during peace times, because wars endorse and normalize violence and aggression. So, in my response to when I would tell him, yes, these atrocities were committed by some Igbo soldiers, but we can't hold all Igbo people responsible because of that, or the entire Biafran nation. Yeah, so that would be my response to you. The lack of harmony amongst our people. It's the vicious result of ethnic politics, which has been played over the years. You look at the leadership of Biafra, second in command, one of the generals, General Okonkwo, was not Igbo. One of the most successful field commanders, Colonel Achibong, was not Igbo. The secretary to the Biafran government, Enyo Akpan, was not Igbo. Mr. Kobara, who played a fundamental diplomatic role, was not Igbo. I mean, we can talk about what the original structure was, as opposed to what we have today, which is a lot of disunity.
All right, thank you, Amori. Let's hear from Ed. Ed, you're next, and then one more.
All right, thank you so much, Rudolf. And let me say another thank you to you, Rudolf, because I know, was it last 2 weeks we had a chat and I suggested you bring him on. I know you probably had it in mind before, but the speed at which you did it was great. So, Professor Effiong, it's great to see you. I actually was trying to learn more about your father's role during the war, right? So, and whenever I searched him on Google, your picture actually comes out, and I was like, "Is this the same person?" So I kind of made the connections because I looked at your work, and most of your work was on being a child during the Biafra War. So thank you so much, and by extension, we all want to thank your father through you for the great role he played during that very crucial time in Nigeria's history. My question goes like this. You are, out in quotes, say you're a non-Igbo Biafra.
And what we see actually is that a lot of the issues that the Igbo people have today are issues that also confront most of us from the southern parts of the country, especially those of us from the south, and maybe, which you're part of too. And even in this small platform, we see a lot of a flux in terms of different ideas on how to approach this thing. Some people are just a bit not. Some people are not very comfortable with the Biafra way of doing it. I personally am very open to federalism or regionalism. I don't really mind that. But my question is, how do we harmonize these different sort of ideologies, because it's the same issues that we have. For example, the Igbo man complains about not being able to have that ease of business in terms of having a port close to them. But what the Igbo man's complaint is really about is that Calabar needs a seaport. It's not even an Igbo. It's not even an Igbo question, right? In the same way, I'm a Southerner. The last time we had, the last and the only time we had a president, Goodluck, part of the whole propaganda I was bullied out with was that he's an Igbo president. So the issues that affects the Igbo people also affects me as a Southerner. So how do you think, and this is not just for the people who have the Biafra cause, how do you think these groups of people who have the same issues will be able to have a consensus on how to do it while still respecting each other's, identity, each other's autonomy? And the second question, this is a bit academic. I know your dad was a general during the Biafran War, so I just wanted to know in a little bit, how did he go back to the was there a process of reabsorption into the Nigerian army for most of those people? And what was the process? What was going through his mind being maybe an ethic leader of the Biafran cause for those few days and being confronted with, do I want to surrender or do I want to just keep this thing going? Like, what was the frame of his mind then?
It's a lot, but I'll try. I think the first question, how do we respect each other in spite of our differences, and they may be ideological or ethnic or religious. The respect would come from the fact that we are all equally victims and we're fighting for the same thing. It doesn't matter that we're using different pathways to get there, and we just need to respect that. And the fact you've mentioned the Calabar port, you can say the same thing about the port in
Warri.
Warri, Port Harcourt. The moment we come to that realization and we accept that we're in this together, it's the same problem, but we're using different labels and different pathways to get there. That is one thing that would really help us, as opposed to dismissing completely the ideas of someone else. Our problem right now is that there's a strong center that controls everything, including our lives and our resources, and we need to dismantle that power structure. And it doesn't matter whether I call myself Biafran or whether I call myself anything else. It's the same problem that we are encountering. And if we can have a degree of greater regional autonomy where we have in our hands the control of our destinies in our hands, I think that would really help. So those differences bother me as much as they bother you. And then for me, they're holding us back. Because as long as you remain divided in any situation where there's dictatorial control, disunity becomes a major weapon. It happened in South Africa, it's happened in many other places, and it's happening with us, even if we may not recognize it. The moment we put aside those differences and we can believe in collaborating as people who are pursuing the same thing, even if it's through different ways, that would be a major, it would be a major success story, I think, on several levels. We would achieve more than we're achieving now, which is nothing. I'm trying to remember, the other question about you referred to my
Your
father.
father's state of mind.
Yeah, it was an Ibibio, not Effiong. We're closely related.
Okay.
Ibibio General. After the war, I think we had mentioned this in my previous conversation with Rudolf. He was not. Some people were reabsorbed, but they reabsorbed them, but started them from their pre-war ranks. So someone like Ukiwe had to go to his pre-war rank, and a number of other people who fought in Biafra. People like my father were mostly dismissed, some with benefits. My father had nothing. He did not, until he died in 2003 from the end of the war. He really didn't have a means of livelihood. But as far as identity, being an Ibibio officer in Biafra, it was really of no consequence, because Biafra was not really that divided along ethnic lines until maybe later on.
Okay.
All right. Thank you,
Thank
Ed.
you so much.
Let's go to the last question from KJ. KJ, go ahead.
Okay. Dr. Rudolf, thank you so much for allowing me to contribute to this great man. Prof, I just want to come and thank you. If I didn't thank you, my father will wake up from the grave and come and slap me. I'm serious. On behalf of my parents, my uncles who fought in the war, my community, I want to thank you for your father's contribution and stand. I listened to you, and I've been listening from back. I wasn't going to be on this platform today, but when I saw how you started, and I just wanted to come in and say thank you so much. We appreciate what he did. We appreciate his stand. You see, what your dad showed is that is the reason why majority, I will not want to call them, but majority of Nigerians don't like us, because we have that boldness to stand our ground and stand for what we believe and speak the truth to power. There are very few people who do that. Some of them cower the way when they have to speak to the authority what is right. But he stood to the end. And I want to say, earlier on someone was saying, what could have been done differently? These questions that I posed to my uncles who were members of the Biafran War, and some of them were colonels and all that, and they said, look, at that point, there was very few things that what's his name now, General Ojukwu could have done, because like my dad said, tons and tons of dead bodies were being brought from the north. In the train, they just brought, some had headed to Enugu, some head past Enugu, and all that. Trailers were being loaded. So at that point, even they met and said, you should go to war. I mean, let us divide. So it wasn't maybe there was something they didn't do. They did what they could have done at the age that if I was there, I would have done the same thing. So I want to thank you and appreciate what your dad did, General Effiong. It is one picture that I have always had in my mind, your father's picture, and that of Ojukwu and the Chukwumanzogu. And we appreciate what he did, even though lives were lost. I hope that Nigerians, we as a nation remaining behind, can learn. Because if we don't learn, just like your dad said, and that's what that statement he made haunts me all the time when I see what's going on. He said, if you do not address that system, the thing that happened before, the people will rise and they will still do it again. So I wish that somebody can listen and go back to those tapes and take that advice and act quickly. Thank you so much for coming. God bless you, sir.
All right. Thank you, KJ. And on that note, we want to thank Professor Effiong for staying with us. I saw many questions on the comment section. I did not ignore them. The reason why I basically wouldn't repeat them is that he answered those questions in my conversation with him. So you can go back and watch the interview from the beginning. I know most people joined us late, so the questions have been answered. There's no need to repeat them. I'll give you a chance, Professor Effiong, to give us a final thought. And I plead that when your next book comes out, you come back and we'll have a wider conversation, because I want to talk about teaching in America, and which is something I'm interested in. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all the kind words. I appreciate you having me here. Just remember that these are my views, and I'm human, so I'll probably err, and I'll probably change some of these views. Let me just say this really quickly. I'm not appreciated in America as I would be in Nigeria. as an educator. And people should be aware that many of us here are actually seeking ways to come back. I've applied to the University of Abuja. I even went there and visited them. They never responded to me. I've applied to the American University in Adamawa State. I've done those things, and many of us are doing those things because many of us, our hearts are with our people. I would be much more appreciated by my people. I'm not saying I'm not having a good experience here, but it would be much more fulfilling. So, but recognize the fact that if you don't respond to me, if you don't give it to me, I'll look for it somewhere else. So let's bear that in mind, that people are not just running away and teaching in other places because they want to abandon Nigeria. The other thing I want to also say, someone had mentioned this, and this is Women's History Month. I think one of the mistakes I feel I've made today is not acknowledge women as I should have. That war, the contributions of women are phenomenal. Women handled the healthcare section, the refugee situation, which was fundamental to saving human lives. I was among some IPOB members once, and I asked them about Mrs. Njideka Ojukwu, the woman that was there with him during the war, was married to him. They didn't even know who I was talking about. She suffered with him. She helped to sustain and keep his family together. Otherwise, it would have been fractured. She participated in humanitarian services. Why are we not talking about women like that? Why were we not talking about women who participated in after attack? You know, I'm not faulting this group. I'm not faulting Rudolf. I'm actually faulting myself, because one way or the other, I could have instigated conversations more about women. I hope next time there'll be that opportunity. But thank you so much for having me. This is a story that we have to keep alive, because we must memorialize our people, and we cannot afford to, create this impression that their lives were lost in vain. They were not lost in vain. And so we must continue to celebrate them and acknowledge the fact that these were people who unjustly were wasted, at least on the Nigerian side, but to us, they were not wasted lives, and we'll continue to celebrate them and remember them. Thank you for having me here today, and I appreciate the conversations, the questions, and all the kind things you've said. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Prof. And we appreciate you. Let's take a break. When we come back, we do feedback on the briefing on what we saw, and KJ will help with that. Thank you so much, and I appreciate everybody.
Are we away or are we?
We're done. We're done.
Yeah, I'm
67, Biafra declared independence from Nigeria, sparking a brutal civil war. But despite its struggle, no major world power officially backed Biafra. Why? First, Britain supported Nigeria. As Nigeria's former colonial ruler, Britain had economic and strategic interests, especially in oil-rich regions controlled by the Nigerian government. They supplied weapons, intelligence, and diplomatic backing to Lagos. Next, the Soviet Union and the United States both favored Nigeria. The Cold War was raging, but neither superpower wanted to risk their global influence over Biafra. The Soviets sent arms to Nigeria, while the U.S. maintained neutrality but refused to recognize Biafra. Even African nations turned their backs. The Organization of African Unity, OAU, saw Biafra's secession as a threat to African unity, fearing it could inspire other separatist movements. Only a few, like Tanzania, Gabon, and Ivory Coast, recognized Biafra. Biafra's only real support came through humanitarian aid and secret arms deals. France, Portugal, and Israel quietly sent weapons, but it wasn't enough to turn the tide. Meanwhile, Biafrans relied on foreign charities like the Red Cross for food and medicine. By January 1970, after years of starvation and war, Biafra was forced to surrender. Without strong international backing, its dream of independence was crushed.
Olisa malugonko ene menenua Okudilio nyekelanio Chukuna malugo yobia diocha Agaranya chogo kowe bili Agaranya chogo kowe rienio Owe chuku bezie chuku Nuche chukwa busigi fegemeo Nuche chukwa busia ifegemeo Nifo solo ne asi alibazie Oboye bebe agaranya muliba Oboye wuru agaranya mebibe solea Mano agaranya wa Oboye afyozie nipakwa Agaranya chogo kowe bili Agaranya chogo kowe rienyo Oboye chikubezio lisa Kodili ma kodili bemo Kodili wakema kodili wanima Naino kwane we beluge beluo Kodili ma kodili bemo Kodili kemo kodili heyo Ibedwe me wane Nikadie zibo heyo
Wenyo mazolo bio Akwa mazolo bio Max Ibia bunye go kwanu mo no fube nazo Olaga ni biazigo Mmanwu olaga do ni biazigo Akwa mwilo chiyo biko rapuzoro Kona bazia
Onyo mazoro biko Abamba wazoro nasari Ibia unye negwana Ulagado ni biazigo Ulagado ni biazigo Abamba wilo chino Biko rapu zoro